Well, good morning, both here in the room and out there in Zoom land. Welcome to the new and emerging products panel. Actually, Elliot, you want to participate in the Q&A? Why don't you just come on up? It's easier. I'm Steve Hamilton, and I'll be moderator for this session. And we have a couple of remote presenters. So first, let me apologize for the logistics screw-ups that will inevitably happen. I'm sure by now we're all pretty much accustomed to how fragile our virtual world still is. So we'll do the best we can to hold it together, and I'll try not to be too clumsy. So let's get started. So human beings as a species are still in the process of migrating toward cities all over the world. And that means that as the population in cities continues to grow, the demand for transportation services within those cities also continues to grow. So there's a process going on constantly to develop and deploy new transit services. Now, most of them, in fact, almost all of them, exploit incumbent transit solutions. Now, as much as anything, the purpose for this conference is to try to break through the limitations that currently exist in those incumbent solutions. So there's no truer measure of how successful we're being in pursuing that objective than the number of new projects each year that instead are applying advanced transit solutions. So this session is our annual look at that measure. Now, the topic or term advanced transit solution is a pretty broad one. Personally, I like to organize it into these three categories. So micromobility comes in many forms. You've got skateboards, scooters, bicycles, trikes, even microcars. And you have both human-powered and e-versions of those. But as you heard earlier, micromobility offers a huge potential. The studies of transit use and length of trips around metropolitan areas show that they're binodal. You've got almost half of the trips less than 3.5 miles, and then another peak between 11 and 12 miles. So the ability to handle a large percentage of the trips and to do so in a very energy efficient fashion cannot be overlooked here. Now, this area had a lot of projects, again, pilots that were run this year, and it was very dynamic, right? So you had projects starting and stopping with very little notice. Now, in past years, that dynamicity really has been around the search for successful technologies and business models. Basically, the vendors deployed vehicles that were simply not robust enough to tolerate the abuse that the riders gave them. As a result, the capital investments were higher than expected and the business models blew up. This year, and that seems to be kind of worked out, the big issues this year seem to be arguments between the vendors and the municipalities over safety and rights of way. So do you let scooters operate on sidewalks where they might injure pedestrians? Or do you force them to operate on the street where they could be injured by cars? And then whatever that decision is, how do you enforce it? So just 2 weeks ago, for example, a major pilot in Miami was abruptly terminated by the city over the scooters on sidewalks issue. Now, the other challenge they're facing in this space is maintaining good distribution for those vehicles and how that compromises their operations. Now, of course, the autonomous vehicles have been all the buzz for the last few years. You can understand why, right? So AVs have the tremendous advantage that they use existing roadways as their guideways. That means you can deploy much more quickly and at lower costs than automated transit networks. But AVs also have a tremendous disadvantage that they use existing roads as their guideways. And that means that they're never going to be either as safe or as fast as autonomous transit networks. Now, the AV market is really 5 markets. The hype seems to have cooled a little bit. They're still making progress. In my opinion, this is the order in which those markets will mature. You've got long-haul trucking that is actually currently operational at a commercial level in very limited fashion in both Florida and Texas at level 3. California has a license 0 for commercial package delivery in San Jose area. And you've got a number of level 3 autonomous shuttle pilots running all over the country. Now, as the technology advances, retail auto manufacturers continue to roll out more advanced capabilities for automated driving assistance systems. But the big news is really that this year, 5 companies have been licensed for commercial level 4 operation of robo-taxis. So it looks like the robo cars are really coming. Now, our automated transit networks operate small driverless vehicles, electric vehicles on protected and exclusive guideways. This exclusive use allows the automation to be a lot simpler. But the requirement of the guideway means that the projects take much longer to develop and deploy. That process usually is about a 5-stage or phase process. There's a procurement and decision phase where both the vendor and the technology are chosen, and it usually includes some kind of feasibility assessment. Then the design phase where they actually make the final implementation decisions. Of course, then you construct it, build the guideways, and finish all the stations, etc. Then you actually have an integration or setup phase where you take the vehicles and the operators and you get everything running. And that ends in a safety certification. And then finally, you can operate the system. Now, from the perspective of any given project, time on this graph goes from left to right. But from our perspective, looking at what's coming down the pike, we want to look from right to left. Now, I hesitate to mention the Boring Company's project at Las Vegas because the capacity is so low. But realistically, it uses private vehicles, automated vehicles, and exclusive guideways. And I believe it has offline stations. And they did finish construction of the guideways this year. Now, there are 4 other projects in the world that might be more recognizable as ATMs. And we have 3 speakers today to describe and give us an update on 3 of those projects. So let's hear from them. I'm going to hand this off to Alex. Alexander, yeah.
Hello, Steve.
Okay, I can hear a voice. I think we have him. Alexander Kyllmann earned a Bachelor's of Engineering, Electrical Engineering from Rice University. He then got a Master's in Electrical Engineering from Stanford University. Then went on to get an Executive MBA from IPADE in Mexico. Okay, because if that wasn't enough, he had a 20-year career in automotive electronics, where he held positions at Siemens and at Continental. His range of experience is really quite impressive. He was a software engineer, quality engineer, plant manager, and in fact, at one point was director of operations. So he can do it all. Now, apropos to today's topic, Alex is a founding partner at Montutram, and he has been their CEO since 2010. He also was the chief architect behind the design of that system. Now, Montutram's been in negotiations in Mexico for a few installations for quite a while, and Alex joins us today to give us an update on those.
Thank you very much, Steve, for that introduction, and hello to the audience.
Alex, hang on a second. The audio is not quite loud enough yet.
them try now. Alex, can you hear us?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm going there.
Hold on, Alex, 1 second.
Oh, where is it?
We're getting Krista to mute first. Okay, I think we're good.
No, we're not.
No, we're not. Oh, hold on.
No.
Okay, Alex, run.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction, Steve. Can you hear me well now in the auditorium?
Sure.
Good. Well, hello to everybody in Atlanta. Thanks to Krista and to our hosts. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to share my screen now, if that's okay.
Let me know if you have trouble. You may have to unshare yours.
So just let me know when you're seeing my screen.
Okay, 1 second.
On the top, stop sharing. Thank you.
Okay, we see you now, Alex.
Very good. All right. So the official title to my presentation is New and Emerging ATN Projects in Mexico, and I will be talking about that. But the subtitle to my presentation is what it really takes to implement a new rapid transit mode in a city. And this is based on the insight that I have received over many years. And I think that there are a couple of things that are worth sharing in terms of what we have learned. So I'm going to start telling you what I thought when I first started Modutram, but also what we learned from early marketing efforts, and then later what we learned by participating in public-private partnership projects. And what I will end up by telling you what I know and what I don't know today. So let's get started. In 2010, after already having worked for 20 years in the automotive industry, I decided to do something better, but I knew that to implement a new rapid transit mode, automated transit networks in a city, it would take several things. Number one, I already knew from the outset that it would take real hardware and real software, not just PowerPoint, to convince anybody that this was a real option. And to that end, we've been building and growing and improving our test and demo facility here in Guadalajara in Mexico. To date, we have run more than 2,000 hours of pseudo-commercial operation. That means it runs as if though it were a commercial operation, not in test mode, but in real commercial operation mode. We've logged more than 70,000 kilometers of vehicle trips, and we've served more than 160,000 passengers. 10,000 of them have been real passengers, and about 150,000 or more have been virtual passengers. The vehicles have moved, the doors have opened and everything, but instead of having real passengers board them, they've been virtual passengers. And this, of course, has also been due to the pandemic, okay? In that time, we've had 0 accidents, and what you're seeing here are pictures, not computer renderings, of our test facility in Mexico. I also knew from the outset that it would take a package solution and an established supply chain in place. And that's what we've been also building over these last couple of years. Partnerships with strong companies that can really deliver once an order is signed and the time to deliver comes, okay? Some of the companies that we work with, for example, Recal here in Mexico, is a major manufacturer, erector of steel structures. They do more than 150,000 tons of steel structures per year. And also we work with established companies from the automotive industry. Number 3, I knew that it would take target cities with a real need for additional transit infrastructure. And those are abundant here in Mexico, okay? In Mexico, there are 20 some cities, I believe, or maybe a little bit more, that have urban populations with more than 750,000 inhabitants. In those cities, there's a total of 66 million people, and those cities have 280 kilometers of metro in total, 38 kilometers of light rail, 463 kilometers of bus rapid transit, 25 kilometers of cable, so a total of 806 kilometers of mass rapid transit. In other words, transit with dedicated right-of-ways. If you divide this number of kilometers by the total population, the 66 million, that amounts to 12 kilometers per million inhabitants. If we make a comparison with Europe, in European cities, that number is 27. And that's what allows many, many people in Europe to actually use transit as their primary mode of travel for their daily needs, okay? And if you look at other countries in Latin America or Asia or Africa, that number, the number of kilometers per million inhabitants, is even lower. And these are countries with emerging economies. There are many that have just 3 or 4 kilometers per million inhabitants, okay? Here in Mexico, you're probably familiar with Cancun as a city. Cancun is the city number 22 in terms of inhabitants population, okay, with almost 1 million inhabitants down here at the bottom of the table, see? And they have 0 kilometers of mass rapid transit per million inhabitants. The other cities on this chart, on this table, are the largest, 8 largest cities in Mexico. And with few exceptions, such as Mexico City, that has a very expansive subway network, most of the cities have around the average or below number of kilometers of mass rapid transit per million inhabitants, okay? Now, Mexican cities are clogged with congestion, and many of them were never designed for the number of cars that run on the streets today. So there really is a need for additional transit infrastructure. But that transit infrastructure has to be economically feasible, okay? We knew from the outset that we were competing against other transit modes, including bus rapid transit, which is a good transit mode if it fits. But the problem is it doesn't fit everywhere, okay? And that's why, for example, Mexico City, the latest transit projects that they've been implementing have all been urban ropeways, okay? And that's because you just want to get off the ground. The problem with urban ropeways is that they're very slow, and they also don't have the types of capacities that are needed in these rapidly growing and highly dense cities, okay? So our first project in Mexico was in the city called Cuernavaca. It was a project that was, from the outset, seen to be a joint project with a bus rapid transit line coming in from the east, okay, where the cities were wide enough to accommodate a specific lane for buses. But going further to the west, the city becomes, the streets become much narrower, as shown on this, in this photo. And on that avenue, that was where an elevated GRT line was planned. Initially, it would have just had 2 stations marked in red, number 1 and number 9, and then the others would have been added in a second phase. And there would have even been an underground phase to get to the very center of the city in the historic center, okay? In Cuernavaca, the government even contracted us to build a small demo facility at the convention center, which was operated during some events. And we showed them in in a computer rendering, what the solution would look like once it got implemented in the city. But that project did not materialize. And so what we've learned in the process are a couple of things. It not only takes what I just mentioned, it also takes real and robust hardware and software, not just any software, okay? Or not just any hardware, I should say. The problem with our demonstrator there at the convention center in Cuernavaca is that it was really not seen as a real transit option. It looked way too much like something that belonged in a theme park more than in a city. And that's why we've been updating and creating new products that are more robust. And that includes our vehicles that now have doors that are coming from a supplier to the mass transit industry, doors that can survive, that have lifetimes of several 100,000 cycles, 500,000 cycles, for example. We're testing our new vehicles on dynamometers at speeds up to or even higher than 80 kilometers per hour. That's 50 miles per hour. Our emulators, for example, are now capable of running virtual and real vehicles on our test track at the same time. So we can now demonstrate complete city networks. And this rack that you can see here on the right of the image, that contains the electronics for the virtual vehicles. And we can just pull these electronic units out and install them in real vehicles, and they will be operating exactly the same as before. So there is no change to the electronics or the software in going from an emulated installation to the real installation. But it doesn't just take that, it also takes a robust organization, and that's what we've been building. Number two, it takes backing, another point, it takes backing from credible and renowned experts. And that includes quality, safety certifications, independent evaluations of compliance with recognized standards. And talking about standards, one thing that has really helped a lot is the inclusion of that official definition of an automated transit network in the ASCE Automated People Standards. Because now we can really tell governments, this is what we're talking about, and it's not just something that we've made up, okay? But very importantly, we learned that the solution had to not just be economically viable, it also had to be politically viable. Politicians making these decisions to implement these systems are worried about the reactions on social media when they present these projects to the public. They don't want to be flooded with memes that ridicule the projects. They want something that everybody emotionally from the first glance will recognize as a credible solution. And that's why our product has been changing and evolving over the years from something that was meant initially for some tourist applications as a starting niche to something that is really the final product for mass transit. Once we had done that, it was very easy to start the dialogue with a government that was interested in putting in a system along, let's say, creating a ring around the city, so to speak. This is a city in Mexico where they had considered a monorail a couple of years ago, but the monorail was way too expensive. And when this government saw our solution, they said, this is exactly what we need. And there was no more discussion about the capacity of small vehicles and things like that. This is a city, I cannot give the name right now because the information is not all public. or there are patches, some pieces of information that are public, but not the whole thing. And since the financial negotiations and the business negotiations are still ongoing, I'm going to leave it at that, but I can describe the system. It has a length of 13.5 kilometers and then 7 kilometers in the second phase. The first phase will have 19 stations, between 60 and 125 driverless trains. The trains are combinations of two vehicles coupled, and they don't have to always stay coupled in two. They can also operate individually, or they can even couple into longer trains when necessary at peak hours of the day. The ridership is expected to be 40 to 65,000 trips per day. And the total public investment is $135 million. It would be a public-private partnership, and it would be implemented in 24 months, okay? You can see some images down at the bottom of what the system entails. So having passed through that and some other projects that we're working on, including airport connectors, I can tell you now that it takes several other things. A well-connected and well-funded proposer or proponent or developer. The city of San Jose is considering an ATN solution or some advanced transit solution to connect the San Jose airport with a train station close by. And they have recognized that to put in something like this as a public-private partnership, you need many different roles. And one of the important roles is that role of a developer that will ultimately be the main counterpart to the city or to the government authorities that are in charge, okay? And you need somebody who is experienced in these PPP projects, and that has been our experience even in Mexico. So summarizing, these are the things that we have found out that it takes, but it also takes good legal and financial advisors to assist the governments. In many cases, governments at the municipal level or even at the state level have not done many PPP projects, and certainly not PPP transit projects. And and add to that new technology projects. And that means that the whole scenario of actually getting a contract with signatures in place is not that easy. And sometimes the governments also have to learn in that process. And that means that it also takes a lot of political will, because there are roadblocks that come up constantly, and somebody has to say, you know, figure out how to get this done and do it, and don't just tell me why it can't be done, okay? So this is my list. I don't know today whether the list is complete, probably it's not, but we've probably got most of the important items on this list. So I just want to close by saying we're not there 100% yet, but we're very, very close. And I really believe what Jeff Bezos said and a couple of other people, every overnight success takes about 10 years to make. Thank you very much.
This worked good. Thank you, Alex. So I guess we've got a few minutes for questions of Alex regarding what he's told us today. So anybody have anything they'd like to ask? All right, I'll start. Alex, you sort of, I read my notes. You talked about having a real partnership. You know, you're not just you're a technology provider, but you've got to have more than technology to do a project. And so I was curious about how you found those partners and at what stage. Well, you told us what stage. What can you share with us about how you managed to attract those folks? Was there some secret sauce that you applied?
No, I don't think there is a secret sauce. I mean, the idea of putting a project like this in place sounds really cool to a lot of people. People understand the concept, they see the benefits. And so in general, what I have seen over these 10 years, there is tremendous goodwill towards, you know, initiatives like this one. And of course, there are some naysayers, but you know, showing people what it's all about and convincing them has not been really difficult. You know, yeah, you know, it's, of course it takes some work, but it's not that difficult.
Christopher, do you have anything from the Zoom audience?
I haven't seen anything, no. Have you? No.
Can I ask a question?
We have one online. We have one online, if that's okay.
Give her a shot.
Okay, I missed your name, so go ahead.
It's me, Rita Castel Branco. Hi. And thanks for your presentation. I was just wondering if there is an approach that I didn't see on your list of checks, but if there is an holistic approach to the mobility system, because what we have understood for a long time is that there is this theory of push and pull, that you have to give alternatives, but you also have to somehow either reduce space for cars or have a very strong parking policy. And sometimes there have been experiments on this in Europe, that you do very good transport systems, and when you don't change the other parts of the system, people continue using their cars, even if it's not at all the best solution. And so you were talking about convincing people. There are also ways that can help a bit, and I was wondering how much is this interconnected or not?
In our case here in Mexico, I think your point is very good, or it's a very interesting question. Here in Mexico, we are relying on, I would say, two things. One, we see our system as part of an integrated multimodal network, not a mode on its own. So yes, we are planning stations to include bicycle parking and things like that, to encourage people to actually leave their cars at home, walk or bike to the closest station, and then use the rapid transit system. But the experience of transit users in Mexico is really bad because of the sardine trips during rush hour. You are forced into these large buses or trains, but with hundreds of other people. It is very uncomfortable, it is unsafe, people steal, and for women especially, it is a nightmare, okay? And so in our solution, every passenger gets a seat, no matter what time of the day it is. And we think that things like that, plus video surveillance in all the vehicles, are actually going to make the difference in, first of all, stopping people who are currently transit users, but as soon as they have a little bit more money, they move to being car users, to keep them as public transportation users, and then slowly to attract automobile users.
Okay, thanks very much, Alex. I'm gonna ask you to release the screen now. I'm gonna ask Krista to hand it off to our next speaker.
Nigel.
Save that question for the
Nigel
section
Clark.
at the end, right? Don't lose it, just save it.
Okay, Nigel, if you can hear us, you can share your screen, please.
So our next speaker is Nigel Clark. Nigel runs Learned Line Partners, which invests in, advises, and sets up corporate governance for projects in business areas that are a strong public policy. His expertise in this area is well earned, as he's been an investor in and a director of multiple businesses, usually involving new healthcare technologies. These include Applied Sciences, Inc., Accessible Diagnostics LLC, Oxford Bioelectronics, where he is currently chairman, and Automarker Limited, where he is also chairman. But again, pertinent to today's topic, not all of his endeavors have been healthcare related. He was an early investor and a director at Ultra Global. And in 2016, which was years after that PRT system was well established at Heathrow Airport, Nigel created Ultra MTS Limited to refine the product and market the technology worldwide. Nigel serves as executive chairman of Ultra MTS, and he's here with us today to talk about the project that they have in Chengdu, China. Nigel, please take it away.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me okay.
Oh, yes.
Screen seems to be working and I've turned the light out. Right, so I'm here talking about the history of Ultra, actually, and where we are now. I have been involved in the Ultra project since 1997, when I first met Professor Martin Lowson, who invented the technology, and have kind of lived with it ever since in its various guises. So if I'll start, I need the next slide going there, sorry. I think none of us are in any doubt about what we mean by PRT, and I don't mind if we call it ATN. The only thing I wanted to really talk about in this slide is the importance of the last point. We have one system already in operation and we're building another one, as we'll talk about in a moment. But the fundamental point here is that we are actually regulated under existing legislation in 2 different countries as a railway, because in neither case did they have appropriate legislation to actually put in place something that didn't have rails and operated on guideway. I think that will be overtaken in time, as Alexander was saying, but at the moment, you're dealing with national authorities and you have to change from one place to the next. So just to recap, Heathrow has been operating since 2010. The system is actually 3.8 kilometers of track. It's carried more than 2 million passengers. It's a commercial operation. Heathrow make quite a good return every year on this. It has system availability of 99.7%. 82% of passengers don't wait at all. The average wait time is under 8 seconds. 4 million vehicle kilometers traveled so far, and it's got a 100% safety record. And in that time, only 1 vehicle has broken down on the track. And that's done for the very simple reason that, of course, the vehicles are communicating with the main control system all the time. There are a number of performance parameters that the system keeps a measure of. If any vehicle falls below a parameter in any sense, it's pulled off into the workshop. So that's the reason that happens. But there is one other important point about Heathrow that I want to put in now, because it informs what I'm going to say later. There is a small hotel on the edge of the car park, top right on the screen, which was one of the worst hotels in the area around Heathrow, known as the Thistle. And in about 2016, they came to see us and said, could they cut a hole in the fence and put in a turnstile so that the guests in the hotel could use the pod system to access Heathrow, the airport itself, rather than wait for the shuttle bus, which operates around Heathrow, where on average their guests were waiting 25 minutes for a shuttle bus and they might then get stuck in traffic. The end result of that was that they put a turnstile in at their own expense. Heathrow charged each passenger £5 each way, so that's around $7 each way. 100,000 passengers used it over year 1. So from the Heathrow pod system perspective, that was £1 million of income from the investment in a small turnstile. But from the Thistle Hotel's point of view, which is the important point, their occupancy rate went up from 60% to 90%, and their rack rate was able to improve as well, making it an economical hotel rather than a loss-making one. And that's one of the most important aspects of this. So now we come to Chengdu. We were approached initially by the Chinese in 2016. They had already we'd hosted them at Heathrow twice. I went to Chengdu in July 2016, and they basically said, we've decided that we want to put in a PRT system into the new airport that we're building. This is part of the Belt and Road project at Chengdu. They are also building an aerotropolis outside the airport, and their view would be that this would be put into the airport but would then extend into the aerotropolis. They were quite clear they wanted a replication of Heathrow updated for modern technology. We signed a cooperation agreement initially with China Railways Engineering. That was necessary really because, as Alexander would recognize, we're a very small startup business effectively. China Railways has a turnover of $90 billion a year. They were a reasonably good-sized company, and they built most of the world's high-speed rail. They wanted to introduce PRT into China more broadly. There was a tender process, but it was clear from fairly early on there weren't going to be very many bidders. And when it was completed, there had been only one bid made by us. And Chinese law requires 3 bids for any public project. So there then had to be a special additional process, which lasted 2 weeks, in which people were asked to express an interest, and nobody did. And law was then satisfied and contracts were signed. So we've been working since the end of 2018. It won't surprise you to learn that trying to run a project in the middle of COVID has been difficult. We've not been able to send an engineer to China for nearly 2 years. So we had to do it virtually. And that's been a senior challenge. But if you look at the overall project, this is 9.6 kilometers of track. It's 4 stations. The budget is around 62 million US. It does have a potential second phase, but you can see that actually it's pretty small. If you look on the right, in the overall scheme of the project which is going on here, this new airport has a budget of $10.4 billion. So the PRT is tiny, but it's an extremely visible part of the airport in the sense that it's an introduction of a new technology to China, and it's one that they clearly want to see work. We are definitely clear, China is a special case for a lot of these things, but there are aspects of it which would be reflected in any country who tried to work. For example, the Chinese would not have contemplated the idea of us having a construction partner who was not Chinese. They certainly wouldn't have wanted the vehicles manufactured anywhere else. So there were issues that we had to kind of deal with as we went in building a partnership to deal with this. And Alexander's point about having a good team is an essential element of this. So those are the simple comparisons. They're really, as you can see, very similar. But the truth is that there are some big changes between Heathrow and Chengdu, and the 10 years that have passed means absolutely and essentially battery technology is very much better than it was 10 years ago, and so is electrical motor technology. And those 2 things alone give some huge efficiency gains to the whole system. So what was attractive 10 years ago in economical terms is now very attractive. This is the overall design, very simple, but that distance there is about 4 kilometers, just over 4 kilometers. And you can see on the left-hand side, the 2 terminals. I'll show some photographs in a moment. And the system going to the 2 of them, then running straight back down to the car parking. The aerotropolis is to the north of this, so it would extend up to there, but there are also airport developments to the south, which can be taken in future phases. And here is the airport under construction now. So those are the 2 terminals. There will be 6 terminals in the final fully completed version. The PRT actually runs from the top of the picture down. And as you can see, this is where the PRT will come in on the left-hand side here. And you can see slightly better, again, coming down towards us from the north. And even better here, the rather uterine and very thin construction you can see there is the PRT system coming down from the top. And then there's a roundabout there, which actually is distribution between the 2 terminals, and the stations are underneath. There are 2 more stations in the car park. Here are some visualizations of what it will look like. So this is there is a tunnel that runs under the aircraft taxiway, and this will be the way into there. And this is what the track looks like. I can get my computer functioning. There we go. That's what the track looks like. And again, that is the station and the car park. And a slightly better picture of overall, just to give you a feel. The building on the top there with PRT written on it is the control room. That will also have the workshop for the servicing of vehicles. And there are the 2 stations in the car park as it stands. And those are now all under construction. The opening date is scheduled for next year. So I just want to reflect on some of the things that Alexander's been talking about. Why has PRT uptake been so slow, and what have we learned since 2010? Well, traditionally, we've looked at this from the point of view of engineering, then design, then politics, and then money. Almost all projects seem to start with engineers gathering around and saying, can we do this? And what can we design? And what would it look like? How many stations do we need? How many vehicles do we need? And so forth. The thing I have learned above all, that is simply the wrong way around. You will not build a PRT system unless you start with money. How are you going to pay for this? Because if you can't answer the question, if you're simply saying, we would like a large amount of public money, please, you won't get there. There are all sorts of reasons for believing that PRT is unlike public transportation in the sense that because of this, which is the thing that matters more than anything else, the fact that the vehicles are very small and very light means that your infrastructure is very, very light. The Ultra system Glydways have the loading of a footbridge. That means that 2 things. One, the actual straight costs of the infrastructure are small, but most importantly, the degree to which you need to disturb the surface under the surface of cities, which means you're starting to interfere with utilities, which is a massively expensive thing to do, that is reduced dramatically. So the overall costs, and I did some interesting stats earlier about the difference between PRT costs and light rail costs, for example, we think it's around 1/5 the cost of light rail to build PRT in its totality. So it's this issue, the issue of very light vehicles makes all the difference to being able to actually pay for this. And what we've done is to concentrate on how you can ensure that a PRT system requires no public cash. Now, there is a difference between public cash and being on the public books, and that's a political issue that one needs to be aware of. But that's to do with actually, in order to find, it is possible to privately finance the building, the capital expenditure in the first place of creating the PRT system, as long as you have some form of guaranteed operations contract that goes beyond that. And that is a political exercise by and large, because inevitably, if you've got a guarantee, it will appear in the public account somewhere. So one needs to be aware of that. But that's that point. If you look at cities, and we're now in discussion about putting what we think will be the world's first urban system when we've built it, these are the objectives in any city you talk to. So I hosted the mayor of one of the largest cities in Texas at Heathrow, and he set out for me the things that we need to see in any public transportation system in order to get people out of their cars in Texas. And that's a legitimate question. It's a very big issue for the States, where you have very few cities with significant public transportation systems that are used by the majority of the population. If I say to you that in the UK, in London, 85% of commuter journeys are undertaken on public transportation. And that's in a city of 8.5 million people. It's quite unlike anywhere else in the UK, where it's the other way around. It's no more than 15%, because they don't have metros by and large. But that's the issue that you're having to deal with. In fact, I suspect in the States, the biggest issue is if you can get people out of their cars 1 mile earlier than they normally would, you transform the center of your urban area, because the use of space changes dramatically. So reducing congestion remains critical. Improving the environment, biggest change I've seen is the result of COP26. We're suddenly starting to talk to people in urban areas who are saying, we have a net zero target for 2030, how do we do it? And they can only do it by getting the cars out. I'm not one great fan of negative transportation policy. If I can recommend you all a single book that really should change people's thinking, it's called Transport for Humans by two guys called Pete Dyson and Rory Sutherland. And what they do is to approach transportation from the point of view of behavioral science, not from the point of view of engineering consultancy. And it totally changes the way you think about it. We know from our own surveying of passengers at Heathrow that the thing that they like most about the system is not the speed, it's solely about predictability of journey time. They all know that from the moment they park their car to the moment they're in security in Terminal 5 is 6 minutes, and it's always 6 minutes. Most of us find public transportation very irritating because we can't predict how long it will take. There are some secondary irritations like not going from where you want to where you want, and then finding yourself in a hurry and constantly stopping for other people to get on and off and so forth. But predictability is the thing that matters, not speed. When you're talking about traveling at 30 miles an hour, speed's not an issue. And anyway, 30 miles an hour is a mile every 2 minutes. It's quick enough for most people when they're in a city, when the average car is moving at 12 miles an hour, if you're lucky. So other bits and pieces we've got, though, land value, and that's critically important. I'll come on to that. 70 journey times, as I've said, transforming last-minute deliveries and improving recycling. One of the things we've been told by cities is that they want to be able to see PRT systems to get rid of vans making last-minute deliveries on the road, which is one big element of congestion now, especially with the online purchasing requiring delivery. But also, you might deliver people to the front of a shopping mall to go shopping. Round the back of the shopping mall, you want last-minute deliveries, and they want to see waste disposal, especially recycling waste, to be put back. So a system where your pods are actually also transporting goods and waste is a massive benefit. And we've been working on adapting vehicle design to do exactly that. Real estate value. This is critical to being able to actually pay for the original capital expenditure. All of these kinds of uses of PRT that I've put on this slide, it result in huge increases of land value. And if you say to somebody, right, we will, if we can give you 2 stations on your land, you can either say to them, there'll be an annual charge for having the station, or alternatively, you can make a capital contribution to it in the first place. They know exactly what connectivity does to the value of their land. In London, for example, even on the outskirts of London, proper connectivity adds about £100 to the value of each square foot of office space. If you've got 1 million square feet, you've just added 100 million to the value of your holding. Asking somebody to contribute 20 million to a PRT system that provides them with that gain is a bit of a no-brainer. And therefore, most of the conversations that we've been having now have been around with landholders about how to deal with that. So the other issue about this too is to remember that the speed of building a PRT system is important, because the longer your capital costs are deployed before you get any return on them, makes them considerably more expensive. So if you can commission and build your system in 2 years rather than 4 or 5 years, which a light rail system would want at minimum, you also change the financial picture in terms of any debt structure you've put in. This is another thing that's worth considering. If you're going to build any kind of ATN or PRT system, you need to think about all your revenue streams, because all of them will inform your ability to actually finance your capital costs in the first place and to make an annual return on running the system. And all of these various areas here are areas that we've looked at in relation to how you actually generate revenue from an operating system. Now, you can share those revenues with local authorities, cities, and towns and so forth. I would just raise, I'd probably take issue with Alexandra on one point. you can definitely make an economically viable PRT system in a city of less than 100,000 people. You don't need 750,000. And there are plenty of good examples, I think we have of that. One extra thing here, that this has only just been raised with me because I was approached by a company who are putting in a fiber optic cable for internet connections. And they simply said to us, could we sling our fiber optic cable underneath your PRT system rather than having to dig trenches in the ground and put it in? Well, the answer is yes, of course you can. This is a slightly extreme example of how you do it, because this combines with doing PRT alongside a roadway. But you can see the point here, and you can do that with any of the utilities that you wish. You add water and gas to that. Just a quick economic point too, about this is really in support of how you would do this in the States. Here's a typical business park, 20 offices, each of them in between the buildings, requiring quite a lot of parking for the people who are working there for their cars. If you were to take one of those out and replace it with a multi-story car park, that's what happens. You can put in your 20 buildings and you make a 10% land saving on what you need to have the same number of offices in place. But if you then moved the car park a mile away, say, to much cheaper land, you end up with that. You make a 15% plus saving on land, and actually and that includes the cost of the PRT system. So economically, you've suddenly got a very viable unit here for how you end up paying for your system. We think too that the enhancement to existing public transportation is a critical thing here. Now, this is a European example. I think in the States, you probably find that this wouldn't work in quite the same way at all. You'd end up doing it as park and ride, I suspect. But you can see that most studies will tell you that the result of putting in better connectivity between your transport hubs is that you increase the use of the existing transportation networks.
Nigel, we're running into the lunch hour on this end, so I'm going to ask you to kind of wrap it up.
That's okay. So what we're talking about, though, fundamentally is with feeder and distribution from mass transit is what works for cities. And that's really how one needs to think about it. I think this has already been referred to, but I think people need to think about all of these options which will happen. But the slide that came up earlier, looking at these comparisons, is pretty accurate, we think. The most important thing about PRT is it deals with congestion and allows you to utterly change the attractiveness of the center of your urban areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. So we take one question before we move on to our next speaker. So do we have any from the Zoom audience?
Anybody online have a question?
I think Fernando has one.
Okay.
Fernando has a question.
Sorry.
Fernando has a question.
Oh, okay, let's hear from Fernando.
Okay, so could you unmute Fernando, please?
Yeah, sorry, I was just clapping for the presenter. I wasn't. I didn't have a specific question. It was a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much, Nigel. We're going to move on now. We're fortunate to have with us today two representatives from Glydways. My far left here is Elliot Temple, who's their vice president, and my immediate left is Zachary Phillips. He's their chief business development officer.
I just want to step in and say thank you very much, Chris, for hosting this event. You've been pioneering the thought and sense of disaggregated transit for a long time. Thank you, Gerald, for bringing the political will, which was heard earlier, which I have never heard in all the municipalities, all the cities, all the states that I've been engaged with. So nothing like those words we heard earlier. So thank you so much.
Okay, so steering a product in development, find that sweet spot of success between the market demands and the realities of what it takes to develop and execute the engineering for a product takes a particular skill set. Honed the skill set on 35 previous products. He was previously responsible for building Apple's Shanghai team, and he was founder and CEO of Enhancement, which was a $100 million
company about needs. So he joined Glydways in 2017. He's been instrumental in the development of their product concept and bringing it to market. And he's particularly focused on proliferation within California's Bay Area. So he's here today to tell us about the projects they have going in California.
Thanks very much. And, good afternoon. Very good to see everybody here. Thanks for inviting us back to Podcar. I guess we did something right the first time back in 2019 when we first attended.
Just a second, I just want to make sure that the audience can hear on Zoom. Just checking. So,
You can talk right there. They can hear you.
yeah, please continue, and I see if they can.
Yeah, I can also go with my comment.
There.
You're good.
Yeah, go ahead and see what happens. Nobody's complaining yet, so go ahead.
So before we get into the projects, I'd just like to go through a little bit of background, just so you can understand our perspective on how to address the issue of public transit, and how we design a project specifically, or product specifically to address the issue of public transit.
Hold on, it might be a delay.
It's here. So,
They don't hear, so I can.
Do you have any other video?
yes, there's one after this.
Okay,
Just
so
see-
after that video, we'll switch.
Okay.
These are on YouTube also.
Okay.
And our website, right here.
Mhm.
You need to switch.
Okay. So pause with me 1 second. We're gonna switch to a different sound.
Switch now.
Yes, sir, you can switch.
Sorry about that.
All right, cool. So I think we're all here for the same reason. Good? Hello. Okay. So we're all here for the same reason. The recognition together that basically the tools available for public transit aren't working. We can't use them anymore to achieve what we want to, which is bring equity to everybody. And there's a lot of reasons for this. I mean, ride hailing has shown us that people would rather pay more to take their own personal ride than to go on public transit. Ride hailing has also brought more traffic to our city, to added congestion to our highways. Public transit is increasingly expensive to build and operate. It's unsustainable, completely unsustainable. And of course, COVID has showed us that, given just a little bit of push, public transit falls off the deep end with regards to people not wanting to ride it, and also public transit not being able to scale operationally for reduced or changing ridership. And because all of these tools rely on aggregation, I'll explain what that means. Go next slide. Oh, sorry. All right. So aggregation is all about sharing rides, right? Trains do it, buses do it. Everything that shares a ride is aggregation. And what you have then is you have crowding. You have shared vehicles, you have shared space, you have running for the bus, you have running for the train, you have mismatched schedules between trains and buses. You have huge vehicles on very simple right-of-ways that aren't flexible, that are very expensive, that are increasingly unsustainable operationally, that can't scale with demand. A new tool for public transportation is complete disaggregation. Everybody gets their own ride by default. Okay, we raise the bar on everybody because guess what? Everybody goes and does anyway. They all go get a car, right? Because that's the way they want to travel. Given a chance, they go do it. So let's give it to them in public transit from the get-go. So we designed around that. And what does that mean? That means that every single person gets a ride on demand when they need it, right? Within seconds, in 20 seconds, even at peak capacity. Right? They can go from point to point with no stops in between, never slowing down, and never sharing a vehicle, never stopping at another destination. Right? That also means that you can operate the system extremely high operational efficiency, because physically you're never stopping, and so you don't have to go very fast in order to get to the destination that you want in a relatively short period of time. You have to stop and go all the time. You have to lose all that energy. And also we can scale 1-to-1 with demand. Right? One person wants to travel at 3 a.m. in the morning. That's fine. Travel at 3 a.m. in the morning. Right? Your ride's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Also means you can scale. Our vehicle is exceedingly small. We have shrink wrapped it for the 99.99% of travelers, which is, you can put a family in there, but grand majority of travelers are about 1.25 people in commuting hours, which is where your difficulty lies. So compare that traffic. Okay, so you don't need to add more stuff to it if you don't need to. So we can still take wheelchairs, we can still take bicycles, we can still take scooters. We've got all special concessions for all of those things. I have 3 kids, wife, we all fit in one. Sorry, we're working on it. All right. All right. So that means we're very small, which of course impacts the cost of infrastructure, which means also we can use any right of way, and it's more flexible than a larger vehicle. Okay. So this, next slide. So disaggregation is everything. And just to reiterate that point, it's supreme passenger experience. It's an experience that people want to take. It's a ride that people want to get on. So they'll go and find it over their car. It's the lowest cost per mile. Imagine making money from every ride, right? Not spending money on every ride. And what does that mean? That means when you're making money, you're able to use that money for funding flexibility, which we'll talk about a little later, about how you can deploy these projects with private capital or by just lowering fares, right? Increasing public equity. Lowest carbon per mile, complete carbon neutrality, including the infrastructure. Because everything's electric, it's the most efficient way to move anybody around. Solar installed as part of every program that we design, balances that out completely and actually pays back to the city over time. Smallest build and right-of-way cost, 5-foot lanes, can't get any smaller than that. You can fit 2 lanes in every single lane of a car lane. And we fit it that way so we could fit into existing lanes with 2 lanes. Okay? Greatest capacity, 10,000 people per hour. We are designing Glydways for 10,000 people per hour. Okay? This means that even those channels that you need high capacity, you can supply it.
Okay, so we're using the latest autonomy, we're using the latest following, we're using the latest system management. We'll talk about that a little later to achieve that number. Right? Mesh networking from city to suburb. Okay, that means you've got high capacity trunks, your low capacity feeders. And also we're talking about this vehicle, it's got rubber tires, it's on concrete, it's not using proprietary infrastructure type. So these vehicles can come off in the future when we've worked out the regulation for that and go directly to your house in the suburb where you don't need that high capacity. And then connection perfection, again, entire journey experience, effortless. It improves every single public transit mode. The biggest problem with public transit is matching those schedules. Otherwise, there's no connection, right? Not to talk about last or first and connections. Next slide. Lower. Oh, I have to. So Glydways is a new on-demand public available transportation system. It's anytime. It's made possible through the power of disaggregation. Completely, everything from top to bottom. What does that mean? Next slide. That means the entire system, the infrastructure, the vehicle, the control system, the access points, everything is disaggregated. Every single part of the system is independent and robust to failure. So you've got continuous flow. That means the trunk links, the thing that carries all the capacity, always flows, never stops. It's like a perfect highway, right? You've got offline, completely bi-directional access points. Okay, this is key because we don't want someone to go another direction they don't want to go. You can access every access point from both directions and then leave to either direction. Every single point is a pinched loop, which means you don't need any looping infrastructure or backing up. It could be a complete line. You can have trunk, you can have branches coming off the trunk. Everything is possible. And so every access spot is fully disaggregated, meaning every access spot can take as long as it needs for a passenger to board or depart. You can take 2 minutes, you're elderly, you drop your groceries, whatever, that's fine. That is your spot. Take your time, do it the way you need to do it. We want to provide access in the best way possible. We want to remove all barriers to access to public transit. And this is the way to do it. Fully disaggregated for every single person. And of course, the Glydways central management system to run it all, right? Because this is the entire system. Expansion into a mesh network. I've talked about that before. As you scale the system, you have trunks, you have branches. You can design it like the circular loops, or you can design it like a tree with branches coming off it. There's a lot of ways to build a system, and really it's not dictated by technology. Technology is the flexibility to adapt to the environment that it's going into. So we've designed it for that. Next slide. All right, so here's the vehicle. It's really nice. I mean, there's a lot of creature comforts in here. You've got control of your own temperature, you've got control of your own music, you've got control over your own lighting. This is your ride. By having a personal ride and not sharing it, we're not basing on the lowest common denominator. We're basing on the highest common denominator. You can do that. Your car. We're trying to make it as good as your own car. Okay. But within the realms, you know, here. But you can put a bike in there, you can put a wheelchair in there. It's all touchless. You can use your phone to call it. You can use kiosk, of course. You've got all those things. But very, very efficient and a great user experience. Excellent. Yeah, so future can be totally bright. You know, there's so many good things out here that we could do and we could deploy. But with anything new comes risk. And so that's been key. Next slide. Glydways was designed with risk in mind, completely. We've worked with publics over in California, which they have a lot of requirements. And we've been working with the public hand in hand to understand their risk and understand how we can design this product not only to match their needs, but to also lower the risk of execution. And that's simple infrastructure, dumb, simple infrastructure. What does that mean? Rubber tires on concrete. That means any kind of right-of-way that's available, we can retrofit to. That also means that later on, when level 5, level 4 is more developed and commoditized and inexpensive and everybody can afford it, we can come off that system, go into your suburb neighborhood and drop you off right at your door. So compatible, forward and backwards, okay? Anybody can build that infrastructure as well. So we'll talk about our partners. Mature and EV and robust autonomy. We are sourcing from existing supply chains. EV technology, batteries, motors, and autonomy. We are leveraging everything that's already out there. We're not inventing any of this stuff, right? So it's safe, and actually autonomy is so overdeveloped at this point that you can add layers of robustness with what's out there, trying to solve for level 5, okay? Funding flexibility, I talked about this a little bit earlier. Finance today at current transit fares, because we're making profit on them, and that profit can be used to bring in private capital to build out those systems with nothing down by the public. or lower your ticket price to improve equity. It's your choice. It's your city. It's your community. What do you want to do? Right? And then, of course, industry needing partners. We're not doing this on our own. It's impossible. I think this was spoken about a little bit before. PPP is really important to understand. You need a partner that can handle that. We're partnered with Plenary Group on a few projects. The San Jose project we'll talk about a little bit. WebCore Obayashi for construction partners. So Obayashi is global. They can go anywhere, but you can also reference local consultants as well. Roush to build all of our vehicles so they can scale up production. We're not doing these things. People know how to do this. Right? We're using standard parts. And an HNTV for our engineering firm for all of our projects. So we work with public agencies proactively to make sure that we understand where their risks are to try to build them into the product so we can lower this and execute on it. Excellent. Sorry, going very quickly. All right, so working with public. This is our test facility. It's the Glydways development facility in Contra Costa, California. It's built on public land. We didn't go and build this in a private park somewhere. We built it on public land. It's actually parkland. State parkland. They let us build this because they understand the implications of all this. And so part of that entire relationship is working with them, convincing them, and showing them. So we're partners doing it this. We're not developing on our own supplies, right? And so we practice what we preach with regards to our first development facility. So we'll have fleet operations in Q1 of next year. So I invite you all to come and see it when we have that running and come take a ride. All right. And we're in collaboration with the Contra Costa Transportation Authority in the area. So working hand in hand. Okay, next slide. So our commercial pilots. So we've spent a lot of time focusing on the Bay Area because it was our original intention that if we can deploy in California, we can deploy anywhere, right? Right? So anyway, and we're going to be certified by the CPUC in California, which is they do rail, they do limo services, they do that, all that kind of stuff, so that they're flexible to certify, and they're excited to certify. To be honest, we've got 4 projects: San Jose, South San Francisco, East Contra Costa County, and San Diego. We're going to go through 3 of these. We're not going to go through San Diego today. So San Jose is the first one, and this is just the start. We're moving millions of people with these systems every year. Okay. Next slide. All right, so San Jose. So Diridon Station Airport Phase 1. This is something that was spoken about a little bit before. The city's been looking at this solution for like 20 years. Right? They're trying to connect the airport. The BART, which is the local train, like local subway train, completely missed the airport. How'd that happen? You know, they couldn't decide which way. They had to pick one way because the thing's not flexible enough to get there. So the airport's still disconnected from mass transit. So we're closing the link. We're connecting the airport to transit. The airport's at the top, and downtown is Diridon Station, which is basically where the BART goes. Again, metro train. Caltrain goes there. The light rail goes there. VTA buses go there. It's a big transit station, basically, and there's a huge amount of development down there as well. Google's going in there and they're building a lot of stuff. So we're connecting that huge hub to the airport, right? Now you notice you had to go through a park there. We can talk a little bit about how we bring some benefit to that. But we have tons of access. Original idea was to connect airport to this. Done. And with traditional technology, absolutely. That's the easiest way to do it, because every time you want to stop traditional technology, you make it harder for everybody else, or the unit economics make it worse. What we did was we put 12 access points across these 4 miles. We connected every single terminal, parking lot, hotel, future hotel, and airport facility structure to this system. Every single point. We have 3 stops in the park itself. Why would we do this? Because the park is an asset. People need to be able to get to it, and they can't currently, so it's underutilized. And the last one, we've got multiple stops down Diridon, which allows people to join the system from developments there. And so we've gone from 1 form of ridership, Diridon Station to the airport, to 3. So now we have more than 3 times as many riders. And so we can now have 5.4 million riders by 2030, is what we predict. And we can use that revenue source to subsidize the system, right? And so we're actually in terms of our unsolicited proposal, so I can't go into too much detail right now that we made to the city of San Jose, together with Plenary and WebCore and Obayashi. We're asking for a fraction of the capitalization amount to build this system. The rest is going to be private. It's going to be ridership rates. And so it supports other transit modes. We talked about that. And the city's entered into an RFP. We kind of gave them a reason to do so. And so now they're doing an RFP and it's expected in quarter one. Okay. Next slide. And this is just the beginning. This is the beginning. This is the start. You get the feet on the ground, start to expand. This is a flexible system. You don't need to do lines. That's where you start because that's how people think. And typically that's where existing right-of-way corridors exist. You start lines, but then you start to branch. Start to connect existing transit, additional light rail stations, go downtown, go down Stevens Creek, which is a big boulevard, connect big companies around there because everybody needs access to the system. Oh, we're almost done. Thanks. And that's how we start to create a mesh network locally in this area. And later on, we'll connect these things together, and you'll have multiple different ways to get to every destination. And just like it's been said before, every single destination on this map adds value to every other destination because every single access spot where you can get in the vehicle can go to any other access spot. So you don't even need to figure out which direction you want to head. It just goes. Okay, next slide. Are we done? Maybe skip the visuals. We got some other projects here. I want to keep conscious of the time here. So we've got East Contra Costa County and South San Francisco. The one thing I'd like to note is East Contra Costa County is in process to do an RFP for the system. Our development track is right next to it. And South San Francisco is completing, just completed, a little bit more feasibility study completed by Kyllmann that basically, that give you a little bit of insight here, that says this system can be operationally possible. All right. So let's skip to some pictures, just to show you some pictures in here. Just skip through a few more slides. There you go. Actually, go back up one. Go back up one. That one. Yeah, this one. So this is a report that RF did back in 2017 about how you would typically install or deploy a traditional PRT system. And we designed the system specifically to avoid this type of constraints. And you can see there's a lot of looping that's going on. That's a lot of extra infrastructure. You don't need to do that. With our full bidirectionality, you can design it as a line if you want. And that's could be the most cost-effective way to do it, at least to start. And so you can see we've literally reduced the number of trackway by 50%. And so that just goes to show how the flexibility of the system can enable more efficient infrastructure, no matter which kind you build. Okay. And actually, a little bit earlier here, we actually come down to the ground. We're thinking of leveraging the existing road because it's a little bit overbuilt, putting a fence and putting our system directly on there so we don't have to build anything at all. So here's just some pictures of the system going through San Jose at different points. It's mostly, it's about half elevated and half at grade, going through the park, adding value everywhere we go, because access is you know, access leads to equity, and access and equity is value, and access is value. One interesting one, if you go back a little bit, yeah, these are backup slides after this. So this is actually a point, one more back. This just shows the flexibility of what a small vehicle and flexible infrastructure can do. This actually is onto the airport itself. It's difficult to access Terminal B, and so we went directly onto the parking structure. I'm just going to build it on directly onto there. You can't do that with a train or a bus. And so providing access because we're flexible enough to fit where nothing else will, and designing a system that can effectively go, right, and can scale to the future, not just this system. Keep on going as technology develops.